Welcome to the Alain Guillot podcast, a podcast about life, leadership, and money matters. Our guest today is Caitlin O'Connell. Caitlin is an instructor at Stanford University Medical School, a scientific consultant, author, co-founder, and CEO of Utopia Scientific, and an expert on elephants. And today, we will be speaking about her latest book, Wild Rituals, 10 Lessons Animals Can Teach Us About Connection, Community, and Ourselves. Caitlin, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, well, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
So in this time of our life, especially getting out of the coronavirus, these are things that we need to relearn. We need to relearn how to connect, how to be part of a community. And yeah, so your book is quite timely. We can learn from animals.
Yes, definitely. I think I wanted to remind ourselves that we are very similar to other social animals and have the same needs and same rituals. And just seeing how important ritual is to other social animals is an important reminder of how reunions are important to us, how really just simple basic things like looking at each other in the eye and saying hello. These are things that, especially during the pandemic and having a mask on and not being able to smile, you learn to express yourself more with your eyes. But just now being able to come back together, it's I think this whole year and a half has been a really critical reminder for us of how important connection is, and an in-person connection.
So I wonder if we could start with you telling us a little bit about your background. I mean, imagine you are 17 years old, you are walking to the hallways of your high school and you are trying to decide what to do with your life. How is it that you became so enamored with science, with elephants? I even read that you took French classes as well. So
Yes.
tell us a little bit about how the series of steps that led you to where you are today.
Okay, sure. I've always had an interest in nature, but I also had an interest in art and French as a language. And, I wasn't sure which direction I might go, but I always came back to science. And, I loved animals. I loved being outside, camping and appreciating nature. That I've figured out how to make that into a profession. I wasn't sure which animal I might be lucky enough to focus on. I mean, my original love was frogs, and then I moved into insects. But I realized the main thing that interested me was how animals communicate, and mostly through vocal communication or body language or even vibrations, which is what the subject of my master's thesis was, on insect vibrational communication. So by the time I hit high school, I was taking all the heavy biology and science classes, knowing that I was going to go to college and major in biology. But from there, studying elephants was pure serendipity. I was volunteering in different game parks in Southern Africa. My boyfriend at the time, now husband, and I decided to take a year off between our master's and PhD and traveled through Southern Africa. And one thing led to another, and we were offered this position with the Namibian government to study elephants. And then the rest is history. I've been doing that for the last 30 years.
Okay, and you have written a few books about elephants themselves, and one of them it was a non-fiction about the ivory trade. And this, I have always been curious about this because this is kind of the one thing that is contributing to the decline of elephants, and it's a horrific ad that we do for that piece of ivory. So I wonder if you just could tell us a little bit about how does that work? How much is it worth? How much of that is going on? Are there any attempts or for the governments to reduce the amount of trades? So just general information
Yeah,
about it.
yeah. It's it's been a problem. Humans have been interested in ivory ever since we've had a relationship with elephants. It's considered an art object, and in the past 100 years, it has been a really big problem. But in the 70s, 80s, there was a big spike, and then very recently a big spike in ivory trading. And most of my books are nonfiction, but the first book I really wanted to write was a fictionalized story about the ivory trade, because when I was working in Namibia, my boss was chasing the town doctor who was smuggling ivory, and I was just so struck by the risks people were taking in order to stop this from happening. And it was so inspiring to me that I wanted to write this fictionalized story. And but I couldn't get an agent or a publisher interested. They were always interested in me as a biologist, and we want to hear about you and your studies with elephants and your discoveries. And I thought, well, I really didn't want to write about myself. I wanted to write about what was happening with the ivory trade and get this word out. But over time, I realized, okay, well, I'll write about myself as a scientist, and then I'll write the fiction, which I did. I wrote Ivory Ghosts. It's a thriller about the ivory trade based on my experiences of this town doctor trading ivory. And then I wrote a sequel in China because I had gone to China to do a study on the impact of the ivory trade there. And trying to get more people aware of the issue. That was my real goal. Like, if you could sit on the beach and read this fun thriller and really get a taste for Africa, maybe you'll think more about the plight of elephants. There's two big problems that put elephants at risk. One is their habitat, and we have a decision to make about that, whether we're willing to share the environment with elephants. We're constantly really at war with elephants. The agricultural areas that we have, we're pushing into elephant habitat, and elephant habitat is diminishing at an astonishing rate. And that's a huge problem. And then you have on top of that the ivory trade, which is just devastating for elephants and rhinos. They're both at risk. And the price goes up and down, but for the person on the ground that's going to hunt and kill that elephant, they're pretty much getting at the same rate. So the price going up and down can impact things, but the real trouble is just that messaging on the ground. And then there's all kinds of levels there's white collar crime that's involved, and there's really a lot of global nonprofits and financial institutions that are trying to get at this and deal with the problem. But it's always something that the issues change, and you have to keep moving, and it's just not something we can be complacent about.
Well, I compared your book, that one about the ivory trade, to the movie Blood Diamond, which made us aware of the inhumane activities going on in order for people to search diamonds. So yeah, I compared that, like, it makes us aware of, yeah, these things are real, and there is real suffering going on just for profit of things that are either not essential to society.
Yeah.
Like a piece of ivory is not gonna help me live better, or even I don't know, help my social status in any way. But I guess some people consider that valuable, and it's just damaging our nature. So I hope my grandkids will be able to at least see an elephant on TV, at least.
Yeah, well, hopefully more than that. But that's the other problem, is that we're not willing to adapt our cultural habits. And what, if originally, when there were many, many, many elephants and there were natural mortalities, If you used a tusk from an elephant that died in the wild, then that would be okay. But today, there's so few elephants, and it's so difficult to monitor and make sure. There are entities that spend a lot of time trying to make sure that the ivory that gets utilized for conservation purposes is not poached ivory. It's ivory that came off of a natural mortality. But even then, it's like you can't have two different policies for a global commodity. There's always going to be problems with that approach, and that's what different. And then, then you have countries that have so many elephants, and a lot of pressure from the local population to make sure that elephants pay their way, kind of thing. And that's also a dilemma for other countries who don't have very many elephants left, and they have to deal with policies that they can't sell their ivory. And so it's a really difficult dilemma within Africa and between African range states.
Okay, well, my next question is, before we get to the subject of your book, is how does a regular individual goes to Africa to see these beautiful animals without damaging the environment? I mean, I can go to Paris or Rome, but I have not the slightest idea of how I can go to Africa to spend some time in nature.
Well, that is an excellent question. Some game parks get so full of tourists that it's like big car pileups and chasing after the animals. You really want to pick a country and an ecological outfit that really focuses on ecotourism. And Namibia has a lot of that. Botswana has a lot of that, where they really make a big effort to make sure that all of your dollars go back to local communities that are taking care of the wildlife. So ecotourism is a really important way to see Africa. And then you know that the people that you're seeing the animals with, they care and take care of those animals.
So I will go to my local travel agency and I will say I would like to book a safari trip to Namibia, for example.
Sure, but then make sure that the outfit that I'm going to be traveling with focuses on ecotourism.
Okay, perfect, great. Okay, so let's focus on the subject of your book, Wild Rituals. What inspired you to write this book?
Well, after studying elephants for almost 30 years now, they always surprise me at how similar they are to us. It's just always striking. Every time I'm out in the field, and I feel like it's a privilege. I feel like I'm an anthropologist just secretly watching this other society, the politics and the social dramas within and between families. It's just, watching how important it is for different family members to greet each other. And sometimes they'll be away from each other for maybe a half an hour, and they have this elaborate greeting ceremony when they come back together. And it just always reminds me that we need to engage in ritual in our own lives. And the fact that these rituals are so similar between different animals, and they're used for the same purpose. Greeting, it greases the social wheels and gets kind of damps down any animosity between individuals, and it just takes away any tension. And you see that with elephants, you see that in our own families and communities. So I wanted to write this book because not only do I study elephants, I get to see a lot of different animals being social and engaging in rituals, just like lions. Watching lions play just is a reminder of how ritual is an important way for lions to perfect hunting skills. So by playing and trying to trip each other up and bite each other on the neck, you know, that's just all different ways of gaining skills. You know, watching zebra greeting and their elaborate hierarchy between the males and different groups. It's it just struck me that there was an opportunity to make that connection between all of these different social animals and ourselves. That, you know, we often put ourselves on a pedestal and say that we're above all of these other animals, but we really aren't. We have the same needs and same need for ritual that they do. And just seeing how important ritual is in these other animals' lives made me think, well, this is a great way for us to be thinking of how important ritual is to our own lives.
Well, let me tell you how I have been reading your book. As I'm reading about rituals, I go to YouTube and try to put the keywords about elephant greeting each others, and then I find 5 or 6 videos, and I get to see exactly what you're talking about. And then flamingos as well, and you talk about how they do this fancy dance, and I couldn't visualize it. I couldn't even visualize a flamingo because it's been such a long time since I saw one. But then I go to YouTube and I see them all doing this beautiful dance. So is I guess for the listeners that I suggest that, you know, although you create an imagery that allows to see the animals, just to go and check out YouTube as well, and it will give it a layer of context that goes beyond the words that you put in the book. And also, I know that you are a photographer and you take photography of these animals. So I wonder, are there a place where we could see your photography work as well?
Yes, well, I'm working on that. Through our nonprofit, we're developing more of our photography and an exhibition of that photography. But in the meantime, I have an article coming out in Scientific America for August. It's about elephant play. And there's a number of photographs there that show very strikingly how elephants engage in play, including, you know, like an older brother might fake their strength for a younger brother so that they can win in an arm wrestle kind of thing. Well, you can see an older elephant brother kneeling down so that the younger one can spar with him at the same level. And it's just so visual. You know, you can describe things all you want, but to see it, it's, you know, a picture's worth 1,000 words. And that's partly why I got so intrigued with using photography as a scientific tool, because it's so important to actually see that behavior. And so I've really enjoyed that process of using photographs to help inform my behavioral science.
And also this culture, animal culture, which has been built from generation to generation, it's something, it's like a language that they have to, if you separate a family of elephants from another one, they probably wouldn't know how to behave because they will lose a lot of their culture, no?
Yes. So elephants, the matriarchs, they live in matriarchal societies, and elephants live just as long as we do. So these grandmothers, great-great-grandmothers are the repository of knowledge, and they pass that knowledge on to the next generations. And if that older female dies or, God forbid, gets poached, you lose all of that knowledge, and the next generation has to scramble, and hopefully she passed some of it on so that they can know where those places are to migrate to in very dry seasons. And you know, studies have been done where elephant families who have older individuals in the family were better able to survive these 20-40 year droughts because they would remember that their older matriarch took them to these places. But younger families didn't do as well because they didn't have that knowledge anymore.
Another piece that warmed my heart is a part where you mentioned that younger elephants chew their food and then give it to the older elephants that don't have teeth anymore, so they can
Yeah,
eat it. So can you describe that for us?
it's
I
so
saw that was.
striking. Yeah. So people might not realize that the natural way for an elephant to die is that they lose their last tooth. So they have um, 6 sets of teeth on the top, bottom, and as the first molar moves forward and drops out, then the second one, third one erupt, and then the fourth, fifth one, you can tell how old they are by the which molar is in place. And by the time the fifth and sixth one are there, and the fifth one moves forward and drops out, then they have just one left. And when that one drops out, they actually can't chew their food anymore. And that would be how an elephant would pass away in the wild. But there are some situations where there's a very young bull that has kind of adopted a specific older male. And this is something that I try and bring out in my work to show how important elders are to society, not just female elders, but male elders, and the influence of older males on younger males. And you see these really tight bonds where a younger male will follow the elder around and then chew his food and put it in the elder's mouth. And oh my gosh, it just, it's just a reminder of how important having reverence for our elders in our own society, and how we should be treating them well and keeping them with us, and how much we still can learn from them, and not put them away somewhere. It's really important that we keep our elders with us.
In the cover of your book, you have two beautiful zebras, and you talk about the rituals of zebras as well. Can you tell us how the zebras behave with one another?
Yes, it's really beautiful, and I think so many people love horses, and zebras are, captivate the imagination. They have very similar societies and dominance hierarchies, and this picture on the cover of my book shows two males basically hugging. They're in a very vulnerable situation. They have to place their heads on the neck of the other one, and it's like this little wrap. And in order to do that, you have to have a lot of trust, because the other one could just bite your neck. And a lot of their ritual is kind of evolved from grooming behavior. So nipping up the neck and nipping on the neck is a hello. And they have these elaborate ceremonies between dominant males. The stallion of each group will get together, and then they decide, which one is more dominant, and then they have a lot of olfactory cues, and they'll defecate on each other's defecations, and all of these different ways of symbolizing dominance and recognition of the other group members.
So the premise of your book is 10 lessons animals can teach us. And also to this pandemic, we are losing some of our rituals ourselves. We are not meeting in person anymore. We are not going to funerals. I guess we are going less to religious ceremonies. I wonder if you have an opinion on how detrimental has been the pandemic for us humans.
Yes, and psychologists say that this is going to be a transgenerational loss for people, and not being able to go to funerals and experience grief together. It's been such a challenging time, and I think it has just really brought home the value of being in person together in families, engaging in ritual, coming together and having reunions, and not, oh, I'm too busy, and I'm so caught up in my world and all of my business travel. I think that the really important reminder that the pandemic did give us is that staying in one place and being together is really important, and so many people have lost sight of that. And also just the simple things that I talk about in my first chapter on greeting rituals, looking each other in the eye and saying hello and smiling. Smiling is contagious, and it makes both people feel really good. And just that little thing to start your day, even waking up and saying hello to your loved one and looking them in the eye. When you look each other in the eye, you actually express oxytocin, which is called the bonding hormone, and it makes you feel all warm and fuzzy. And if you just kind of have your head down and make your coffee and don't look at anyone and don't greet anyone, you're really damaging yourself. You're doing yourself a big disservice by not engaging socially, even starting at home, and then as you walk out the front door, and then as you go into your work environment. The simplest basic things that I talk about are really important to keep in mind, and that strengthens relationships and goes from there.
Okay, for many reasons, many of our listeners, they are not going to go and book a trip to Africa to get closer to nature or to the elephants. What would be one or two suggestions that you would give to the listeners in order for them to get closer to nature without going to the zoo? Because I don't promote the zoo. I think the zoo is horrible. So what would be other alternative from
Yeah,
either going to
that's
Africa
a
or
really
going
good
to...
question. No, I talk about this in my renewals chapter, where being out, even in your own backyard or a city park or your local forest. So there's a thing called forest bathing, just going into the forest and immersing yourself in that experience and feeling the breeze through the trees and the smells of the forest. There are old documentations of how if you pay attention to the passing of time, it actually is easier to accept the passing of time. So journaling. So when I was writing that chapter, I'm sitting in my backyard watching two orioles building a nest. And that it's actually been studied that if you pay more attention to the world around you and the passage of time in nature, it helps you accept the passage of time. And I found that really striking and very satisfying, just sitting and watching. The female oriole will strip the fan palm and then fly off, and the male will come and guard her. They go off and then come back and get the next one, and then you start to hear them in the nest, and that you get the passage of time by paying attention to nature. And that, I think, is you don't have to go anywhere to just have a mindfulness and awareness of the world around you. It just is a question of taking that moment to recognize it, whether it's in your yard or in a city park or the closest place you can get to getting away from concrete and being around trees and any of the animals that are living in that environment.
One thing that I found peculiar in the midst of the pandemic is that we couldn't go to bar, restaurants, movie theaters, of none of that. So a lot of people went to the park, and I just found the parks overcrowded. And now that bars, restaurants are opening again, it's like almost everybody else
You go back to the
disappeared.
park.
but there is still some people going to the park, and yeah, I have a love affair with going to the park every week and absorb nature. So
I
so
love seeing that. I love seeing how many families, last Thanksgiving, we went to Joshua Tree, and we had groups of friends, but everyone had their own place, and we came together outside to eat food that we brought. We didn't share anything because it was still in the pandemic. But it really heartened me to see how many people went into Joshua Tree, seeing all the families that were there to celebrate nature. I thought that was so beautiful, and I was really happy to see that, despite the crowds. Yeah, there were a lot of people there, but it was just so nice to know that people prioritize being in nature and recognize the importance of being in nature to themselves and to sharing and having an experience. Communicating in that environment is really helps change your dynamic. It gets you out of the house, gets you into a very different environment. So suddenly you might start talking about something that you wouldn't normally talk about. And in that way, it's very therapeutic and really kind of helps reset your thinking.
Are there any sanctuaries or national parks in the United States that you would recommend for people who want to get closer to nature and take it as an adventure?
Well, there are many. I mean, in California, if I just go up the coast, you know, the Kings Canyon National Park with the amazing sequoias, the redwoods along in Marin, and Yosemite National Park, Joshua Tree, Death Valley. There's so many in California, and then going up the Pacific Northwest up to Olympia. They're really beautiful parks in this country. I was just in Boston for some of the research that I'm doing on elephants, and we got to go up to Maine, and it just reminded me of how spectacular the Maine coast is and how much forest is still there. And it was really just so nice to see that, you know, despite deforestation and challenges with climate change, that there still are these places intact that are so beautiful.
Well, I would like to recommend looking at flamingos from national parks in Florida, and
Yes.
also crocodiles or alligators.
Yes, there's some great places to see flamingos marching. The Bahamas, Florida, even in sanctuaries, especially in the March, April, where they're starting to engage in courtship rituals and then nest building, and there's all kinds of beautiful courtship displays that you can see with flamingos. One of my favorites.
So there you go, guys. You have to get closer to nature. You can go to your backyard national park or state park and take a copy of the book, Wild Rituals. Can you tell us one more time the title of the book and where can the listeners follow you?
Oh, sure. Wild Rituals, 10 lessons that animals can teach us about connection, community, and ourselves. You can find it through my publisher, Chronicle Press, or your favorite local bookstore, or Amazon, Barnes and Noble. My social media handle is Elephant Skinny, all one word. And you can see my other books at CaitlynO'Connell.com. Our nonprofit is Utopia Scientific, utopiascientific.org, all one word. You can see some of our work there. And in the future, we'll be posting our photography there as well.
Caitlin, thank you so much for your time.
Oh, sure. Thanks so much for having me. It was a pleasure.